Congressman Mark Green is on the line now and has been in that region, and I want to hear a little bit about what you saw and what you learned. Thank you for joining us here on The Drive.
Great to be back with you, and a very interesting trip to Brussels to meet with NATO, and then the EU, and then on to Ukraine to meet with their leadership.
So we get two different versions of this. I mean, it seems that our intelligence community, our military, and the President of the United States say it looks like an invasion is imminent. And then when you hear from the leaders of Ukraine, they seem to be backpedaling on that a little bit, saying, no, nothing is imminent. So what is the truth here?
So President Zelensky's got to thread a needle. He is in a very difficult situation. He's got Russia massing on his border, and it looks very convincing. In fact, we just got notified yesterday that they've put blood and plasma into their hospitals. They supplied, the blood and plasma, which has a shelf life. So that kind of sets the window of when to expect something. He's balancing this threat with the threat that if they go crazy about it, money stops flowing into Ukraine, people start making runs on the banks, the currency dives, all of which destabilizes the country and is a win for Putin also. So he has to try to keep people calm, but at the same time prepare. So, and they've been at war with Russia since 2014, the Crimean, and then, of course, into the Donbas. So for them, there's a little bit less, or not, I don't want to say urgency, but less. I mean, they've been in the fight. They've had 3,000 plus die in the Donbas region. So he's got a balancing act. We know the intel we've seen, much of which is classified, but that's been communicated to him. I will say that their understanding of the intel is the same as ours. We made clear of that. I think they're taking the appropriate military precautions. They're asking us for as much lethal aid as they can get, but at the same time trying to keep the international press from scaring everybody and creating instability that gives Putin a win either way.
Yeah, I can understand trying to thread that needle and how difficult that must be for the leader of Ukraine. Okay, so do you think that the Ukrainians have a chance against the Russian army? I mean, it's sizable and it's quite a force, but won't the Ukrainians be, if they have to, fighting from entrenched positions, which makes it much more difficult for the Russians?
Well, you're right. So typically in the defense, you have a bit of an advantage. You're behind cover and concealment and, as you said, entrenched positions. That does provide an advantage, but the size of the force, the capability, both the combined arms team, I mean, what we're looking at is air, both fixed wing and rotary wing. We're looking at Marines coming in from the ocean, the Russian Navy that is arrayed there in the Black Sea, and then 127,000 troops ready to go. That's a big force, and ultimately, what we hope to do, the best outcome would be to create enough concern that the costs will be so high that it becomes a deterrence. So the more lethal aid we get to Ukraine, the more costs there will be, despite the fact that they might lose and then wind up or win, and Russia wins and there's an insurgency that follows. We just want the cost to be perceived by Putin as too high.
All right. So the last question I have is, a lot of people who are listening, they may not follow foreign affairs very closely. We have troops that are on standby to be ready. We're asking them to, be in a state of readiness in case they are needed. But we need to make it very clear, I think, to the American people that we're not talking about troops going into Ukraine. We would be going there to support NATO troops in surrounding countries, correct?
That's correct. When Vladimir Putin moved troops into Belarus, north of Ukraine, it put Russian buildup on the border of Poland, a NATO country, and the Baltic states, a NATO country. That is a threat to NATO. And so we have a solemn oath that's a part of Article 5. And remember, when we got hit at the Twin Towers, those NATO countries went to war with us in Afghanistan. I, in Iraq, had wounded British SAS soldiers that were a part of a mission I did Halloween night 2003. 4 of them were wounded, and I went and pulled them bleeding into my helicopter. NATO came to our aid. Now we've got Russians who are massing on the borders of Poland, Ukraine. Ukraine's not a NATO ally, but Poland and Lithuania, the Baltic states. And that's where we're going to send soldiers, just to make sure Putin doesn't keep going. And to make sure that he understands we're committed to those NATO allies. And I think that's the right thing to do. We're not going to send troops to Ukraine. They don't want us, Brian. They actually said, we'll fight. We know how to fight. We've been fighting these guys. We stopped them when they came in before. There's a line now where there's on one side Russians and on one side Ukrainians, and they're confident if they have the right equipment, they can fight.
All right, so the last thing that I would like to ask you about is why the Russians are now seeming so adventurous, why the Chinese are now feeling so adventurous in the South China Sea, and why the North Koreans and the Iranians are acting up. They seem that a lot of people on the world stage don't have any respect for what's going on in America and America's reaction to these things. What's going on?
Well, I will tell you my opinion, and then I will give you the opinion. I met in NATO with the NATO representatives of Poland and the Baltic states, and I won't say which of those guys said it, but one of them said it's because of weakness last August. Now, we all know that last August was the failed withdrawal from Afghanistan and the abandonment of our allies there. And so that's exactly what's going on. Putin sees an incredibly weak president who, did that failure in Afghanistan, who, when in 2014 he was vice president, Obama and he allowed Putin to go into Crimea, who lifted the Nord Stream 2 pipeline sanctions, which, by the way, every single guy we met with in Ukraine said, if you reinstate if they shut down Nord Stream 2, there is no invasion because Russia has to have this pipeline flowing to Europe. So we have a president who has shown incredible weakness, and so that is why now, because I think that's what your question is. Now, I will say, if Afghanistan was a big fat 0, the response here is a C minus. There have been some mistakes, but it's significantly better than in Afghanistan. So maybe, perhaps, they're learning. I think we need to do more lethal aid. I think there are several things other than that we need to do. Cyber assistance, because we know cyber attacks are coming. The lethal aid they've requested, et cetera. But overall, Blinken's rhetoric and the president's rhetoric has been good, with the exception of stupid comment he made at the press conference about a minor incursion, somehow suggesting that'd be allowed. They walked that back, but that, I don't know if that was, I don't even want to speculate. But anyway, I was about to go where I couldn't go.
No, I understand. Discretion, the better part of valor in that particular case.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Congressman, I want to say thank you so much, and I appreciate your time after this very important trip. It helps us to have a little better understanding of what's going on there, but I'm with you 1,000%. I think that the world is testing this president after what they saw in Afghanistan, and that very, very much seems to be the case. And, if I were Putin and I looked at what happened in Afghanistan, and I looked at our leader, who, seem to be lost and not know what day it is some days, I would think this is the time, if there ever was one.
I think that's exactly correct. If I were to put it in my words, I'd say it's now or never for Vladimir Putin, and that's what he's thinking.